Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. We are live here. It's Jeff Rich from the Burning Archive, and we're talking today about the world history, geopolitics, implications of the 2024 Indian election. Yesterday, June the 4th, those election results for the Lok Sabha, the lower house of the Indian Parliament, Congress, maybe it's called, I'm not sure, Lok Sabha, those results came in, and the winner is, well, at this point, it still seems to be quite debated exactly who the winner is. Was it Narendra Modi? Was it Rahul Gandhi from the Congress Party? Was it Bharat? Was it the West? Or was democracy, global majority, and world peace the real winner of this election result? I'm going to be talking about all those things on today's live stream and video. And I won't so much talk about the immediate politics or the domestic issues with India. After all, I'm in Australia. India gets to decide its own fate, or Bharat gets to decide its own fate. But I do want to reflect a little bit upon the debate about democracy, the debate about India's rise, and how this election fits into all that. And there have been a few interesting comments, including from historians, on this very topic. Okay, everyone, so thanks so much for joining me. Let me just mention, of course, Burning Archive is a YouTube channel that talks about history, culture, and good books in history, good books in literature as well. And you can support me there at the little places shown on the slide. And I also have a course that has just been released, which is an introductory guide to geopolitics and history. If you go to courses.jeffrichwriter.com, you'll find out all about that. And I've got some more mini courses in the pipeline, so I'll tell you more about that at another time. If you're online or whatever, do say hello. But if you're watching this on the replay, send us a chat and tell us where you're coming from, especially tell us where you're coming from if you're watching in India, including let me know where within the enormous country of India you're coming from, and what your take on the Indian 2024 election is. Okay, so let me just have a little drink. And checking everything's working there technically. It's always a bit of a stress when you do this sort of live streaming thing, especially when you've got like a home office converted into a worldwide internet studio broadcast center, as we can with our current sort of setup. Okay, so the election results in India have come out, and it appears to be that Narendra Modi's kind of coalition, largely based on the BJP, I think it's called the NDA. I'm not entirely sure what NDA stands for. Maybe someone can let me know in the chat if they do know. Has been returned with a reduced majority and a reliance on small coalition partners, which is perhaps not quite the outcome that Narendra Modi wanted. Hello, Judge Holden Club Lounge from Sydney. And on the other hand, the coalition of parties known as the India Coalition, which, if you like, had at its core the old Congress Party, has, it seems, increased its vote somewhat against some of the predictions and some of the exit polls. So what has been the result? And there are some very conflicted views on this. But before we get into that, let me just comment that apart from anything else, this seems to have been a remarkable, achievement of democratic governance in India, of Indian politics and culture. 640 million people have voted. It's taken 7 weeks across, obviously, all the multiple regions, including sort of regional assembly votes as well, and all in the midst of a very difficult, indeed deadly at times, heat wave. I think I saw a news report that there was a 50-degree temperature in Delhi not so long ago. I remember once I think it was in 48 degree day in northern New South Wales, and it's oppressively hot to have that sort of temperature. So my heart goes out to all the people in India who have been enduring this heat wave. So arguably this is the largest democratic process in history, and one should take some time to think about that more carefully. Of course, people are, producing their headlines, producing their hot takes, all that sort of thing. But I think the big picture is we've had the largest country on earth, the largest democracy on earth, and in India's view, or Bharat's view, the mother of democracy on earth, has engaged in a democratic process during which many people, particularly emigre Indian elites, some people within India itself, including Rahul Gandhi, and some sort of Western media, political type commentators, have questioned whether indeed India is still a democracy. Indeed, about a year ago, it was George Soros who questioned whether India was really a democracy, whether they were under Modi backsliding away into some kind of authoritarianism. And that, of course, led to Dr. S.J. Shanker's famous remark, viral remark, that George Soros was, and let me try to get it correct this time, old, rich, opinionated and dangerous. So was George Soros right, or is India actually a democracy? I saw a tweet from the historian Priya Satter, who's based at Stanford University. Let me just bring it up here for you, if I may. There we go. Priya Satter, who's actually a really excellent historian of nations and empires, has tweeted out a commentary from Pratap Banu Mehta, who I don't know, but she quotes a line there that this election was not an ordinary election. At stake was the continuing possibility of politics itself. Fine historian Priya Satter, but I do wonder whether that is just getting a little bit too apocalyptic about an election after all. And I'll return to those comments in the article on which they're based a little bit later on, but I'd love to hear from any viewers either now or in the comments later about whether they see that view as accurate, because there certainly has been a lot of emotion in relationship to that. But the view reflected, I guess, a bit of a, I don't know whether to call it a campaign, but there was certainly a mood, a climate of opinion in the West over the last year or so that, under Modi, under Hindu nationalism, India was sliding into authoritarianism. And indeed, there was a democracy index published by an organisation, I believe, funded by George Soros, that rated India extremely, extremely low on its democracy index. The Australian-based American political sociologist Salvatore Barbonis wrote a number of terrific articles and did some fantastic interviews that actually took apart that particular claim that India was not a democracy, and exposed, I guess, the weaknesses of those claims. And I'd be very interested to see what Salvatore Barbonis has to say about this election result. But I guess the other question is this election is happening at a crucial time in the world, and it may well have some implications for world affairs, geopolitics, and world history. And I say world history because I think this event could potentially have real meaning in that regard. The Western powers were making a play for greater influence over India's foreign policy in the context of, all the conflicts in the world at the moment. And you could imagine a cosmic observer, as the historian Felipe Fernandez Mesto is fond of imagining, looking down from much later on and much higher up down on the world to try to really discern the big picture relevance of what's happened in the world. And you can imagine that cosmic observer looking down at 3 electoral events in 2024 that may well have some implications for the world. One of those is clearly the US presidential election, scheduled for November later this year. Another is the European Parliament elections on the weekend, I think June the 9th. And of course, those elections are going to be in part talking, it's partly a question of war and peace. There was an absolutely enormous, demonstration, a march for peace that happened in sorry, I was just doing something technical there on the stream. In Hungary over the weekend, a very large march, and Viktor Orban's made some powerful speeches saying that, the parliamentary elections in June may well be a choice between war and peace. Others are presenting it as a choice between a shift from the centre right to the far right and all that sort of thing. But the European elections are for a parliament that has a weak oversight of an executive, and the executive of the European Union is not like a fully integrated state. I think arguably the European Union should look to do that. But it's got a lot of member countries to sort of resolve how to federate with. So of those 3 elections, it's perhaps India's that might be more decisive, and will, if indeed, as is expected, Narendra Modi is returned, will his return confirm, strengthen, even give a new energy and importance to the foreign policy approach of India that is partly about embracing the new multipolar world and a rebalancing of the world order in favour of the global majority against the West, which is perhaps why there has been so much angst in the West about this Indian election. So I think this Indian election could well be something that sort of shifts the tide of global events, but the actual results seem to be a little bit murky. So let's just go through what they are. So it appears that, as I think First Post here says with quite, witty, perfect accuracy, NDA didn't lose, too many to lose, and India bloc didn't win enough to win. Like many elections, it's a bit of a compromised result. Well, not a compromised result, but it's not. No one gets everything that they really want. Some of the big ambitions, the big landslides and all that sort of stuff, always people get excited about. But when you have 600 million people, as diverse and different as they are in India, all voting in different ways, it's hardly surprising that it's a little bit hard to interpret results. Nonetheless, Narendra Modi has said that today is a very auspicious day and the NDA is going to form the government for the third consecutive time. We are all thankful to the public for this. People of the nation have reposed their faith in the BJP and the NDA, and our victory is a win of the world's biggest democracy. Nonetheless, there does seem to be some reports today that the opposition parties, which is the India coalition led or primarily led by Rahul Gandhi, is seeking to form a coalition government with sort of everyone but the BJP, and I haven't been able to work through the reports so much to be able to say what is likely to happen. I suspect that is probably going to be a little bit unlikely, having just gone to an election within a coalition for those minor coalition partners of the BJP to ditch them at the last minute. But I suspect that might be the case. Now, we also have this headline from India Express on the election results, which gives us a little bit more detail on what specifically has happened. And it confirms there that, as Narendra Modi said, for the first time for a long time, a government has been elected 3 times in a row. Now, this is very significant, partly in terms of the overall political history of India, strength of its coalition governments. One of the distinctive features of the last 10 years of the Modi government has been its ability to govern with a strong majority, with a strong mandate, and not like some previous Indian governments to be a lot more, caught in the domestic political trap of India. But this newspaper is predicting that NDA will get 292 seats out of 543, so that's a majority, and India will get 232. So the difference is about 60, and then there's another 20 or so parties. I guess with those 20 or so parties, India, if it was lucky, would get 252. If they got some of the minor parties, perhaps that's where they're hoping they will get to a majority. So the BJP is not governing in its own right, it's governing in a coalition. But after all, that is not such a strange event in world politics. Or the Liberal National Party governments pretty much in Australia since whenever it was, 1949, have been governments of a coalition of a major and a minor party. And then we have so it's also, however, a reduced majority for Narendra Modi. So it looks like he's been returned. It looks like the majority is reduced, and arguably that is a bit of a rebuff. And that is certainly the theme, I guess, that is in the international headlines. So let's look at the New York Times, which says that Modi claims third term in India, but his party suffers losses. So yeah, he's got a slightly narrower majority. And a similar commentary is there from Le Monde, the major French paper, often renowned as one of the more serious newspapers in the world. And if I just translate the French for you, if you don't read French, it says, in India, Narendra Modi claims victory, but the opposition is strengthened. The party, the Congress Party, the principal group in the opposition, seems to have nearly doubled its number of seats, and is presenting a sort of a new situation for Narendra Modi. So, and there have been a number of editorials that talk about that perhaps need now for Narendra Modi to be that little bit more coalition oriented. He might have gone a little bit too hard maybe on some of the sort of BJP approach, arguably. But let's look again at a little bit more specifics about what that actual electoral outcome is. So this is the map, and I think this is from India Express. Sorry, India Express, if I've, I'm pretty sure it is from India Express, so thank you, India Express. They have this cute little graphic that compares the seat results across India in 2019 and 2014. So you can see the orange there is the NDA coalition, Narendra Modi's governing coalition. And then when we come to 2024, the others and the India coalition, Congress Party and others, have many more areas, particularly, as you can see here, the areas across the north of India, quite a populous part of India, and quite a lot also in the sort of central part of India there. I'm not exactly sure the name for those regions, so perhaps if people can remind me. But there is a very interesting analysis of that in one of the papers that I read. I think this is from First Post, which said that in addition to the three Hindi heartland states, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan and Haryana, the BJP and allies suffered losses in West Bengal and Maharashtra. And the biggest setback for Narendra Modi was in the north, where besides Uttar Pradesh, it also faced losses in Rajasthan and Haryana. But there were also a few gains elsewhere. So that's basically the sort of outcome of the story. Now, in my experience, winning 3 terms in government is usually seen by most democratic governments as the pinnacle of achievement in political life. It's not a common thing to do, and obviously it never happens to a US president, but it is a hard thing to do, because inevitably after 10 years in office there's going to be a bit of disappointment, there's going to be a bit of wear and tear, all that sort of thing. So it is, if you like, a little bit less good than a status quo situation for Narendra Modi in India. But I don't really want to get too much into the political punditry, but let me show you a little bit how some of the other news headlines are reporting these events. Before I do, good old Reuters. And this really goes to the ramifications of the election. It goes to that whole point of doing the, fast take on the election. I think probably the most important ramification of the election is that majority coalition government is going to be formed for a third time by BJP. And this is again what Narendra Modi has emphasised. This is the first time since 1962 that a government, after completing 2 terms, has returned to power for the third consecutive time. So it's, I guess, if you like, an unusual event of political stability and continuity within India. And in 1962, that was when India and China fought a war. It's a long time ago now. That's 60 years ago. But there is clearly a bit of a moderating message for Narendra Modi as well. There is a sense that he might need to just pare back a little bit and learn to govern in a more coalition sort of way. And I think Narendra Modi is about 75 as well. I guess this is almost certainly going to be his final term in office, likely, I would have thought. And so there will no doubt be discussions about successors and, different leadership styles and all that sort of thing over the next 5 years. But especially within India, I guess one of the key factors seems to be driven by economic concerns. There's a lot of praise for some of the governance change, the foreign policy change, the cultural dimensions, although there's also a lot of argument about cultural dimensions. But the big concern seems to be about the economic issue, and although the Indian economy is growing well, there is a need to increase employment and deal with, the social development issues of India. One writer from the Hindustani Times said, voters have given a warning to the BJP and appear to be saying that they are willing to give one more chance to the party to meet its economic promises. This includes a demand for more government jobs, a demand for more manufacturing jobs, a demand for high agricultural incomes, and easier mobility, education, inclusive growth, and all that sort of thing. So it's perhaps a not untypical sort of, third term election result for a government in a developing country with perhaps rising expectations from the public as India becomes, a stronger economy, stronger power, and the inevitable disappointments and wish for better outcomes. But I wonder, it has also perhaps been a bit of an ambivalent result for India's management of the sort of Western liberal concerns about, Hindu nationalism. Rahul Gandhi was very much the favourite of those Western elites, given, a lot of airtime in the Western media, all that sort of thing. And there does seem to be a bit of a reiteration of this in some of the US response to the election result. Reuters, which can be relied upon to report what the US and British, elites and intelligence agencies want, has said that US expects continued close ties and human rights talks with India after the elections. It seems to be a story primarily targeted to the domestic American and European publics. There's not a lot of substance to it, but it gives you the sense that there is still that, a little bit of standoffishness, a little bit of distancing between India and some of the Western powers. On the other hand, a Indian historian here, whose name is Gautam Chintamari, who I think is a film historian, so good on him, but he got a bit of a gig on RT India, and his comment was that the West's Modi is a dictator narrative is dead. well, I'm not sure it's dead. I think, it's never really had all that much, genuine sustenance in fact, and it's still survived, and I suspect the somewhat mixed result will keep it going for a while, but he does say it probably is really not justified anymore. So there are differing views around this, but I think that comment from the Indian historian is also perhaps reflective of a view that there was perhaps a reasonably coordinated, maybe not regime change, but certainly slight, gentle prodding of the Indian electorate by British, American, Canadian, even perhaps some Australian media and political organisations. Infamously, there was the George Soros comment that I mentioned earlier on, and Dr. S.J. Shanker's response. There's some similarity between the way in which the parties in the opposition parties in India all formed one single solid block to be, anyone but Modi. There is some similarity between that and perhaps what happened in the Hungarian election for trying to elect anyone but Orbán. And arguably they had a little bit more success with it. But certainly it's not complete. And at the end of the day, I suspect Narendra Modi is going to form an executive government at the end of this, and will perhaps be pretty determined to resist any such pressure on his successors in the future. It does, however, also reflect this sort of sense that there's a globalisation of politics. The Indian External Affairs Minister, Dr. S.J. Shanker, has commented on this. And, excuse me one second. He's commented on this as a phenomenon of politics. It's just a new reality of politics that, international issues are part of the domestic debate, and foreign governments, foreign countries, seem to want to have a say in the outcomes within elections. There are huge diasporas around the world, especially for the two largest, most populous countries in the world, India and China. They're two of the largest population groups here in Australia. So some of this globalisation of politics just reflects movement of voices. And I guess it's also perhaps a reminder to everyone in the media, in the mainstream media, in the alternative media, to ask at least three different viewpoints of what is the situation in India from different people in India, and not just various people living in Stanford or America or whatever. I think it's really important for all of us, like me, to really tune into Indian media and not entirely rely on how India is reported in like the ABC here in Australia or the mainstream media in other countries. And there have been a few examples over recent months of somewhat, I'd say pretty dodgy and biased reporting from those mainstream outlets. And I also think that in a way, if I go back to the idea of the cosmic observer looking down at trying to work out what is the historical significance of these three elections in India, Europe, and America, or in Asia, Europe, and America over the last over the next 6 months, I think one of the extraordinary things will be arguably the most successfully conducted, most vibrant, most connected to outcomes for people, sort of a democratic process has occurred in India. Clearly, all, democratic countries have their flaws, but it is, I think, a remarkable thing, and I think that's part of this, the tension in this debate that has occurred over, is India still a democracy, or is India, as many people in India say, is India the mother of democracy? Does India have a historical set of traditions that actually predate Western democracy and represent alternative paths and are represented in the culture of debate, the culture of dialogue, the culture of resolving domestic and foreign policy issues within India or Bharat? In a way, I think it's also a sign of this, what I've dubbed the new tides of globalization, that some of the global influences on politics and global influences on the economy, society, technology are no longer coming from the West. They're coming from the rest of the world. The way in which India does democracy might indeed be a lesson for us, rather than us in the West sort of holding our noses and looking down somewhat sneeringly at how India does democracy. And I think this is a particular challenge for America at the moment. I saw a tweet from Elbridge Colby, the defence China hawk strategist, earlier today, talking about how America's got to wake up because, China's at the cutting edge of human development. My goodness me, he suddenly realised that China's not only part of Asia, but it is actually a bunch of educated humans as well. And in a way, I think we're seeing, in a whole range of ways, the long-held assumptions about American supremacy, about Western supremacy, starting to crumble and collapse. People are recognising that other cultures are their human equals, and indeed their current performance might even be superior. How many people are going to be questioning whether Britain is still a democracy when, there's a vast landslide win against the Conservative Party, as is predicted in July? Will Britain be, worried about in the rest of the world for backsliding into authoritarianism because one of its parties has sort of lost its political credentials? And we see with China's economy and its science, we see with Russia's culture and its skill at war, we see with India's democracy and diplomacy. These are all suggesting that the assumptions that the West is best, that the US is best, the US is number one, are really no longer true. But on the other hand, some of the perhaps overzealous rhetoric in recent times about India, Bharat being, a civilizational state, a Hindu civilizational state, has also taken a bit of a setback, and arguably that is perhaps a good thing. Perhaps it will. It might be good to put a few fences around that. There is a very significant debate around. I see a comment here from Reese Jarrett saying it's always hilarious to see a warmonger having an epiphany on China. Absolutely. Although I've got to say it is hilarious. It's also encouraging, even if I do worry about Elbridge Colby, but at least he's confronting people from the Atlantic Council and all this sort of thing who just are lost in these really they're basically American supremacist beliefs that, America can do anything it wants and the rest of the world are a bunch of bozos who don't know how to do anything. But that's a really good comment, Reese, and it is a bit funny, but I think it's a development to be encouraged. So kudos to Elbridge Colby, even though I really don't think America should go to war with China, and I wish he would not advocate that kind of thing, but at least he's advocating a little bit more modesty in American foreign policy. So yeah, I think this there is a significant tension, Muslim, Hindu, inclusion, exclusion. I don't know if it's quite as bad as it's sometimes portrayed in the Western media. There seems to have been a bit of a cooked up story about Narendra Modi. Well, when I say cooked up, an exaggerated story about Narendra Modi, saying that he believed God had ordained him had sent him for a special purpose. I think it's, that's just, especially when we don't hear the words spoken in Hindi, I suspect that's just simply misrepresenting someone. But I do feel that it might be good just to put a little bit of, trainer wheels, a little bit of modesty on some of the rhetoric about civilizational identity in India. But I do wonder still whether the vision that Modi embraces, which has wide support across the Indian elite, of Viksit Bharat, developed India, or Great India, will indeed be realised. And even perhaps India might change its name, so we all will need to learn to say Bharat properly. And I guess the last aspect of this is diplomacy. But let me... I just missed a beat there. That takes us back to Priya Satya's comment that this election was not an ordinary election. At stake was the continuing possibility of politics itself. Now, democracy is a process, elections are a process, politics continues on. I really think, in a way, people have been encouraged to imagine, and it's been a sort of a fever in globalised politics, I guess, ever since 2016, that, democracy, the walls are closing in on democracy for one reason or another, because of one person or another. And Narendra Modi seems to have been a bit of a victim of this kind of rhetoric, even though I really greatly admire Priya Satya's comment. Now, of course, she's not saying this. She's quoting the person Pratap Banu Mehta. And the headline of his article is, as you can see there, I'll just bring it in a little bit, suffocating shadow has lifted, balance restored. At the very least, the result pricks the bubble of Prime Minister Modi's authority. He made this election about himself, but today he is just another politician cut to size by the people, and that's fine rhetoric, and probably more the work of the sub-editors rather than this person. But let me quote the end of this article too, and I'm doing this partly because I'm getting a bit tired of just reading Western interpretations of it. Good to hear what Indian people, whether in India or in the diaspora, are saying about the situation. So he concludes this article by saying, in this kind of election, the results and policy implications are hard to interpret both for the ruling party and the opposition. Mr. Modi has been partially humbled, but the social infrastructure of communalism and vigilantism he has enabled will not disappear easily. It may acquire an autonomous life of its own. This election is proof that concentration of power is no panacea for India. But will the new political configuration allow the production of the kind of policy consensus that can create the conditions for national regeneration? This is an open question, but for now, this is a moment to savour the sweet elixir of freedom that greater political competition brings. There you go. People can get very excited about election results. They can get very emotional about election results. And I can see that Asher Yadav has said he is going to take stronger decisions and will be more decisive this term. Noted, and people can't say bad things anymore. It's a blessing in disguise. Now, that's a really interesting point, actually, Ashu Yadav. A very shrewd point, if I may so because, like I worked in government for 30 years, and as I think I said at the start of the program, most, democratically elected governments, are delighted to get one term. They're really relieved when they get their second term. And to get 3 terms is, pretty much the pinnacle of political electoral achievement. And that's even in Australia, where the terms are 3 years. In India, they are 5 years. So it is really quite something. And during elections, people think everything rests on the election. But once the election results are out, once the parliamentary composition is settled, I guess all the politics is the ordinary, mundane politics of real government kick in, and it's more about how you do, that ordinary politics, how you take executive action, how you deal with the political cards that you've been dealt with that matters. And the fact is that Modi will form a government. He'll set executive priorities. He'll still be in sort of, charge of his bureaucracy, charge of his ministers, in charge of a, very large, have a commanding presence within the society. And I do think it may well be a significant point that you make, Ashu, that he does take stronger decisions, that this is almost certainly going to be his final term. It is a significant outcome, and is... Oh, yeah, there you go. And he's also saying that the third term is a stronger number of seats than Congress's first term in 2004 and second term, and the second term of 2009. Yeah, absolutely. And that's been, and I think people neglect to, in a way, the Modi government was a bit of a break from a long Indian tradition of, very weak or minority or coalition sort of governments, as you say there, that it's had a lot more executive authority, a lot more political mandate, and that has been combined with Modi's own sort of style of governing, which to some degree has been shaking up the bureaucracy and shaking up, the way things are done in India, which is reminiscent of, things I've seen in Australia under previous governments. That's been more about setting priorities for government rather than what some of these other authors are saying, like the disappearance of politics, the disappearance of political competition. And I think people tend to forget that that has been part of the significance of Modi's period in office, that it's been a more effective government, I guess, than has been the Indian tradition, and that has also had a foreign policy or diplomatic impact. And that was really the last point I kind of wanted to come to, which was, I don't think it's unlikely, I suspect there will be significant change in foreign policy, except this. I mean, no doubt, presumably, Modi and Jaishankar have been watching, the efforts of Soros and the sort of cautious concerns of the White House spokesman on X and Y, or the efforts of the Canadian government to, raise concerns about Sikh terrorists and that sort of thing. They've been watching that and been concerned to kind of protect their election from that kind of event. Ashu's also just reinforcing my point there about coalition, that Congress had to accommodate, that Modi only has to accommodate two allies, assuming that all sticks. And as I understand it, that's not 100% confirmed yet. But Congress has had to accommodate, many more groups. And also Congress, the Congress Party still is very much a dynastic political party, so it perhaps doesn't quite have the same political character, institutional character of Modi and the BJP. It's ironic in a way that so many of these people are bemoaning the lack of democracy in India, want to praise want to see the return to power of a dynasty that has ruled for decades and decades and decades within India since 1947, the Gandhi dynasty. I think on the diplomatic foreign relations front, I think it's not likely to see any real change in foreign policy, but I wonder whether it will give Modi and Jaishankar and the Indian elites a bit more freedom of manoeuvre, because they're less worried about, America sabotaging their election result. America and Britain sabotaging their election result. They've got their 5 more years. The current American or British government are unlikely to be in power then, and so perhaps India can pursue its multilateral independent foreign policy with a little bit more strength. And I think that could potentially be really quite significant. There's clearly let me just read this comment from Vijay Handu. Yes, Modi has been handled, but then he has made inroads in the south, a new source of strength. Let us see how things unfold in face of Occidental and China playing in Indian affairs. Absolutely, that's right. And China was my next point, because obviously the India-China relationship, which I think I will return to in a future show, is really crucial for the future of the world, I think. Could it be that, a re-elected Modi, a re-elected Jaishankar could put some extra effort into mending the India-China relationship with the increasingly close connection between Russia and China, supportive of that, and in a way that might help India achieve both its strategic autonomy, its distancing from the West, and maybe help it solve some of its economic growth issues, and similarly also promote, a deeper institutionalization across the world of more multilateral diplomacy, of a more multipolar world. And so I think that's a really great comment, VJ. I wasn't aware of how China was playing in Indian affairs, but I don't doubt your view that that is the case. Certainly, we've seen it from the Occidentals, the West, as you say, and it's it's quite possible that that has happened. But Ashu has also said that the election result is a light slap on people's face who said Indian democracy is dead. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's in relationship to that. Now, John, this chap here, John Keane, could arguably even be said to be someone who occasionally has indulged in some of the rhetoric that, Modi's threatening democracy and all that kind of thing. He's an Australian kind of, I guess, what would you call him, political historian, political scientist, who specialises in democracy, modes of democracy and histories of democracy. And he tweeted out today in the context of various news stories, I think in the context of saying, well, maybe Congress will be able to negotiate a coalition and, the BJP will all fall down. He commented on the election that, yes, it's a swing against BJP for India, but TV debates fixed on elections indulge cephocracy, by which I think he means rule by elections. The myth that elections are more important than big business, judiciaries, media platforms, civil society, and beware the big decisions forecast by the despot winner Narendra Modi. There you go. So, I don't know quite what he's saying there, what he's hinting at about. He does have a pretty, I don't know, prejudicial view about Narendra Modi, calling him a despot. I think that's really going a little bit too far, John Keane, if you're watching. But he does raise the important point that elections are just one of the processes of a democratic state. It goes back to Ashu's point that there's what's going to happen at the election, and then how will the government actually govern. And I think that is what we will be watching over all. But I guess my total overall wrap on this whole issue, before I sort of throw to any last comments and from you, is that in a way I think this election is, as Ashu says, a light slap on people's face who said Indian democracy is dead. For years now, India has been saying it's not dead, it's the mother of democracy. It's the people who make democracy more than other things. And that, elections and votes and all that sort of stuff are part of the thing, but it's been part of the Western media, political, cultural, intellectual tradition to equate, to see itself, the West, as the original and sole source of democracy. All that talk about Athens and all that sort of thing, or Westminster as the mother of parliaments. None of which is really true, because all the history, as John Keane would know, is that there are multiple sort of streams and strands of democratic cultures, democratic traditions, democratic institutions. But the West is neither the sole source of democracy anymore, nor is it the world's official spokesperson for democracy. And I guess this extraordinary democratic event in India of over 600 million people voting and sort of, in a way, saying, over to you, political leaders, you've got to kind of, negotiate and compromise with each other like good democratic politicians ought to know how to do, has perhaps been a high point indeed of Indian democracy. So that's my thoughts on the thing. Let me just quickly ask if there's anyone out there who wants to throw in a final comment, and while you're just gathering your thoughts, I'll respond to any questions that you have, so just send them in the chat. Let me just mention a couple of things. Of course, hang on, we'll go here first. You can go to my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, and sign up for my free weekly essay on world history, literature and culture. And do that. It's a really good read. I think this week I'm going to be talking about Rabindranath Tagore and I guess traditions of Indian democracy, maybe building a little bit upon this discussion I've had here in the live stream with you all. And I did a video on my YouTube channel just a little bit I released it on Monday, which is actually a reading of Rabindranath Tagore's 1941 essay Crisis in Civilisation, which was I'd not read it before a week or two ago, and it was really a remarkable read. So I read through that whole essay of his. It takes about 20 or 30 minutes, and also have a little introduction to Rabindranath Tagore. Many Indian viewers will need no introduction, but certainly for non-Indian viewers. And you can support my YouTube channel by hitting the thanks button. You can go to Buy Me a Coffee Burning Archive. You can go to my Substack, where you can join for free, and you can also, if you want, become a full member of the Burning Archive and support me a little bit more, and you get a little bit of extra bonus written material every week. And you can also go to my course website, courses.jeffrichwriter.com, and I've got courses on sort of world history. I've got a course on writing too, but that's a bit more sort of specialised for government writers. And also, I've just introduced an introductory course on geopolitics in history that you can check out there. And this is my most recent Substack. EU demands the cone of silence for bureaucrats, which relates to a story about laws prohibiting civil servants from speaking in democracy. And I guess that takes us to the question of how healthy is the EU's democracy. It may well be the topic I talk about next week, because next week we'll have had the results of the June 9th European Union parliamentary elections, but I will decide that a bit later. Oh, I've got a comment from Reese here saying, as Brian Beletic says, and Brian Beletic, love your work if you're watching the show. Fantastic show. Brian Beletic's new atlas, if you haven't watched it, is absolutely essential watching on, I guess, what's going on, particularly in the West Pacific, and also what's going on with the kind of military situation in the various conflicts around the world. Former military officer himself, he lives in, I think, Thailand or something, and he absolutely brilliant analyst, very fact-based, very level-headed, and very wise. But Rees says, as Brian Boledic says, democracy is the people's capacity for self-determination. For a foreigner to dictate what is democracy is antithetical to this. Yes, indeed. Indeed, that is true. Democracy is a big issue, isn't it? And I have just got, during the week, this book, which I think you can see there. There we go. It's Emmanuel Todd's La Défaite de l'Occident, which is the defeat of the West. And I'm going to be doing some more videos about that soon. It hasn't been translated into English, and it's a book that really ought to be debated a bit more. And one of his questions is whether Western democracy, Western states, liberal democracies, are still democracies at all. I think it's an issue that also came up in one of the previous live streams where people raised that. And what I should also say is I also picked up during the week, I know I asked on the community page whether people had some recommendations for best books, particularly written by Indians rather than, Brits and Americans, about the history of India. And a number of people did recommend this book, India, that is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilisation, Constitution. So I have started reading that, and I'm going to do some videos on it soon. And I also picked up this book, which I don't know if people have. I'd be interested in people's views, by Rudranshu Mukherjee, Shobita Punja, and Toby Sinclair. And it's A New History of India. It's a single one-volume one. I'd be interested in what people think of that. But I'm going to be sort of working through that and maybe doing some videos on that. Now, if there are particular books in history or particular issues in geopolitics that you're keen for me to cover on the channel, leave us a comment below and I will get to them. I've got a couple of things planned over the next month or so, including maybe talking about our old friend Yuval Harari, who's come out with an interesting video in the last day or so. And I'm sure a few viewers will be pleased to know I'm going to be doing a video on Yuval Harari soon. And I also plan to do one on John Mearsheimer and Timothy Snyder, and of course on Emmanuel Todd, and also some broader history books as well. Okay, folks, I hope you've enjoyed the stream here today. It's been really fantastic from my point of view. Great comments from VJ and Reese and Ashu and others, and it's been a real delight talking to you. And I'll see you again next week. Still settling exactly when my sort of routine time will be. I might mix it up every now and then depending on the topic and I guess who it's primarily addressing, America, Europe, or Eurasia, because it's a bit challenged sort of trying to get a sensible time zone that fits all of them, and Eastern Australian time. But do check out all the links in the video description about how you can support me, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for watching, everyone.